Welcome to Getting Gritty with It on another episode with my comrade, Yarif Wolak.
Yep.
And we have a legendary voice, an iconic voice with the Philadelphia Flyers and the Philadelphia Phillies. And I don't know, many people don't know him. So this is a new kid on the block here. And he hails from Utica. And I used to live in Rome. So we used to bowl together probably at Kingpin Lane. What do you think, in Jackson? Remember Kingpin Lane?
It's Kingpin Lane. I actually lived about a year and a half of my life in Rome in an apartment there and had to drive by Kingpin Lanes every day. I don't know, is it still open, though? I don't want to break anything bad to you and get you mad, but yeah.
So it's funny you say that. My dad was in the military, so we were stationed at Griffiths, and we were there for about 5 years, and we used to go to a Polski market in town. Oh, they're awesome, Polski. But
Pierogi?
Yeah, that's it. Yep.
Yeah.
Oh,
Pierogi and guamki and all that stuff. Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But Kingpin Lanes was open about 4 years ago. Are they still open today? I'm not so sure. So,
but I know it well. Never bowled there, but I drove by it a lot. So.
Yeah. And the Wonder Bread stores, remember that was
Bread. Yeah, that was down the street.
Elementary.
I used the gas station close by there often because it was right on the way out of town toward Utica. I was working at a radio station in Utica, living in Rome. But the God's country, Manfred's from there, obviously. I'm sure you're well aware of that. The baseball commissioner, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, Yep. And it you know what? It's crazy. It's a small world. Small world, isn't it?
Well, Utica, Rome is a small world, yes. But I love it. I mean, Robert Esch is, obviously from there, and he's done an unbelievable job with the Utica Comets, the AHL. I mean, I announced AHL hockey in Utica for 6 years when they were the Devils back in the late 80s, 90s. And we drew about 2,500, good night over 3,000. And Rob came up to me about 7, 8 years ago and said, hey, chance to get an AHL franchise in Utica. They hadn't had a franchise since the Devils had left. The building was nearly condemned. I said, Robert, don't put any money in that. I mean, geez. And now it's like the top franchise of the AHL. He's done an unbelievable job. The building he's added a restaurant. He's added now a facility across the street where youth hockey rinks are. It's just unbelievable what he's done. I think he owns a couple restaurants now in Utica. He's going to be the mayor of Utica here pretty soon, but he has done an unbelievable job.
I had no idea.
Very proud of him.
And they needed that because after the base closed, they went through some very terrible times, and like the city of Rome was a really good city when the base was up and running. Once that base shut down, it just collapsed, and I felt so bad. Yeah. And I was only 11 years old at the time, so and I'm showing my age now, but
your age. The problem is, I mean, that whole stretch of cities in upstate New York along the Erie Canal went through major drop-offs, obviously, in the economy, and now they're all kind of bouncing back. So it's good to see.
That's good.
Well, until this hit, of course, but
right. Now everything's kind of changed, right? I mean, everything feels a little bit different. Maybe it makes you feel a little nostalgic. I think that's kind of why Jamie's bringing it up, right? I think we all kind of think about our past a little bit more than usual.
Well,
right?
I have, because one of my what I had to do during this quarantine shutdown, whatever you want to call it, is find things to do. We all have had to do that. I started by cleaning my office, which I'm sitting in right now, and in doing that, found a zillion VHS tapes from my first broadcast with the Flyers, and basically right on through it. It turned to DVD somewhere around 2003, but from 95 to 2003, they were all VHS, and I found all these tapes that I had, the playoff games at least, and they were in containers, and I found those, and so I'm now digitizing those. So in digitizing them, you don't have to watch the whole game necessarily, but you have to keep track of where it is, and then I edit them because I get rid of the commercials. So I'm seeing a lot of these games, and I've just about to complete the 95-96 season, and it's amazing. That was my first year on television, working with Gary Dornhofer. Ken Adelberger did the pre and post. This was Prism, so this was a long time ago. But to watch Eric Lindros, and this was still young, still unconcussed Eric Lindros. I mean, this guy was a train. I mean, he was just a train out there. Just get out of his way. And the Legion of Doom and Eric Desjardins. Hexy played some great hockey. That team lost to Florida, the 95-96 team, in the second round of the playoffs. The series was 2-1 Flyers. and they gave up a goal late in the second period of Game 4 down in Florida. They tied the game, lost in overtime, then lost in double overtime in Game 5, and the last game played at the Spectrum, and then lost Game 6. They should have won the series. They were outplaying Florida for so many stretches in that series. That team had a chance, a real chance to win the Cup. And then, of course, the next year, they went to the finals. That team, they should have won a Cup. There's just no doubt somewhere in that stretch where Lindros was still flying around. They should have won a Cup. They dominated. And you think about 95, they went to the conference finals, lost to the Devils, and the Claude Lemieux goal in Game 5 that a lot of people may remember. It beat Hexie from just inside the blue line, kind of turned Game 5 of that series around, and and then and obviously in 97 they made it to the finals, and then Detroit just took them apart. But 3 straight years really where they had a real shot to win the Cup, and it just didn't happen.
And we were actually talking about this, I think our last episode, how big of an impact Eric Lindros really was. Because I'm 32 years old, right? So I got the very end of Eric Lindros, unfortunately, and a lot of what I've seen, at least that I can remember. But I try to put it in perspective. I mean, it's not that different than getting a Connor McDavid today, or even an Austin Matthews. I mean, the amount that was put forth to even bring him over, right? The immense amount of talent that was handed over to get Eric Lindros, right? Mike Ricci was part of that package. Forsberg was part of that package. The cash deal, right? I think they gave $15 million just straight up. That never even happens anymore. I don't think people remember Eric Lindros, unfortunately, because of the concussion, but how high that guy really flew as a Flyer. And the point per game alone, when compared to other Flyers greats, you see it. I mean, he lives on.
Well, to me, it's bittersweet because you mentioned Matthews, McDavid, some of these players, great players. Some use generational as these guys. I don't think they're generational quite yet. They got to show me a little bit more to be generational. Connor McDavid is the most dangerous player in the league right now, but I don't think he really knows where his own zone is a whole lot. He hasn't even done much in the playoffs. He's had one playoff series victory, and he wasn't even the best player in that team in that playoff series. It was Draisaitl. So, Eric Lindros, when he was drafted, had the potential to be the best player the NHL had ever seen, because he had all of the skills in terms of passing, vision, great shot, speed, but he also brought with it that size. That's not anything really anybody besides maybe Gordie Howe brought to the equation in a comparable his size to his era. But Gretzky, Lemieux had size, but wasn't a physical player. Lindros could have had all of that. And to watch the early years of him, he was that. When you talk about years 2, 3, 4, 5, and my first year was his second year in the league. I didn't see his rookie year, but I saw him from year 2 on. Missed a lot of time due to injuries, so that obviously in the end did hold him back. But if he had stayed healthy, a big if, I think he could have been the best player ever in the NHL, because he brought not only the skill, but the power. It's power that in today's game, with the clutch and grab not being allowed, he would have destroyed people. To me, it is bittersweet because he was a great player. He's a Hall of Famer. But you wish if he had stayed healthy, if there hadn't been the divorce, the whole thing, maybe, just maybe, he would have been, on the Mount Rushmore of the NHL. He's not quite there. He's a Hall of Famer. Great player. But he could have been one of those 3 or 4 guys when you talk about Orr and Gretzky and Howe. Crosby's inching his way there. I mean, those guys, there's not many of them. I thought Eric could have been one of them, but he the injuries just and other factors, the whole problem at the end kind of held him back. But still, to watch him as I went back, and you forget, it's been 25 years, right? Okay. To watch these games and to watch the way he could dominate physically and with his skill, it was quite a package as a hockey player there in his younger days.
That's awesome. That is awesome. And he was so physical. It was great. It was really, not only did he have the speed, the tenacity, the dedication, you could tell he had a lot of blood, sweat, and tears with the Flyers organization, but he was as physical as they come. He would destroy players. Not only, he would wean them. He would literally, he was one of the best at taking off the hardest player, one of the hardest players to take off the puck.
Well, you guys are probably too young to remember the 96 series against Tampa Bay. If you were born in 88, you're too young probably to remember that.
Jamie,
when were you born?
'83. So
it was his first round series against Tampa Bay in 1996. The most vicious series that I've ever seen in person. Obviously, there were more vicious series back before my time because you hear about all the blood and guts from there. But that was basically Igor Lanov, Michel Petit, and Eric Lindros, and it was just collision after collision. There was blood all over the place. Everybody took punishment. I do think that took a little bit out of the Flyers, which hurt them for that Florida series I was talking about. But bottom line is, it was unbelievable to watch. I got a chance to watch some of it again as I was digitizing these tapes, and it was kind of fun to see that. I don't, as great as the playoffs are, and I think the first round of these Stanley Cup playoffs is the best entertainment you're going to get in sports because everybody just comes flying out of the gate, and it's always physical. But this one was just above and beyond in terms of physicality, nastiness, and it was great. And Eric was right in the middle of all that. And as I said, the bittersweet part of it, or the bitter part of it, is that it didn't happen. Eric didn't become the best player in the NHL. He became a Hall of Famer. I'm not taking that away from him. It was great. Right. And part of it was the physical stuff. Part of it was the problems he had with management and all that. And it's too bad that we didn't get to see that whole thing play out through its whole time, because it would have been just electric. Legendary. But yeah, I mean, it's as it is, it wasn't bad. Don't get me wrong, but it could have been just that much better.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jimmy.
Go ahead, Yuri.
Okay. So, Jim, one thing I wanted to say about that, it completely transferable skill set. I mean, just first and foremost, I mean, if you just look at it, like you talk about the physicality, and actually, I did just released a video today about Phil Myers, and I just want to touch on this real quick because of what you just said. And I kind of emphasize this in my breakdown of Phil Myers, and that's why I get excited about somebody like Phil Myers. There's this generic trope that keeps going out there that it's a new age, it's a young man's game, and statistically that's not even really that true. It's a young man's game because of the cap, so there's just a lot more opportunity now than there's ever been. And yes, size is not as big of a factor as far as making the NHL, but when it's in the NHL now, I mean, it's a huge thing. That's why I look at somebody like Phil Myers, who, by the definition of what you said, Phil Myers has a lot of that, and even has some of that nastiness that you look for in a guy who's 6'5", right? Because it's not just about being big; it's about, being able to use that size aggressively as well. Do you see that from somebody like Phil Myers, or maybe anybody else in the Flyers, where you see the right stuff, transitions maybe across the generation?
I can't compare him to anything that I was just talking about with Lindros. Right, this was something that was just out there, the physicality of it all. Phil, to me, reminds me of kind of a wild stallion. He's got so much skill, the tool set is amazing, and he puts it together some nights, and he just looks off the charts. There are the nights where he maybe tries to do a little too much, but he's a very young defenseman. He's going to get there. I have a lot of hopes for him, but he still has to hone his game. There's no question about it. But tremendous tool set there, and those nights when he puts it all together, he's the best defenseman on the ice. So when you have that, and sometimes your your third pair, your 5-6 lately, of course, toward the end there, he's 3-4 with Sanheim. But you're talking about a depth defenseman on the depth chart, but a guy who has the potential to be your number one on a given night. So yeah, I have a lot of high hopes for Phil. Physicality is part of his game, but I don't think it's the part that that's not the skill, the skill that comes to mind with him. With me, it's his skating, which is just off the charts. He covers so much ground with those strides of his. And then he's got a lot of other. He's got a decent shot. He's got good vision. His IQ is good. He just gets in trouble sometimes when he tries to do a little too much, and that can be coached.
Agreed.
Yeah. Jim, I just wanted to touch on Claude Giroux for a second and a little bit of Jake Voracek. Over the course of the past few years, Giroux has been one of the most underappreciated athletes in the city of Philadelphia. At times, whether it be because people say he doesn't win enough in the playoffs, he doesn't produce enough in the playoffs, and Jake, people just say, at times, some fans will just say, oh, he needs to produce more. But in today's day NHL, both of these players are producing. What is the misconception with some of the fans and maybe Claude Giroux and Jake Voracek because both players are producing. Jake Voracek would have had his 4th consecutive 60-plus point season, and Claude Giroux was obviously right there behind Jake, in terms of production. And there's very different variables that play in this year in terms of Giroux, with not being, closer, to the 80, 90-point mark, with a brand new kid and different stuff. But what is the misconception with the fans and Claude Giroux and Jake Voracek?
I think you're overplaying it a bit. I don't know if there's a misconception. You're always going to have naysayers, first of all, especially if you're in the social media game. Naysayers everywhere. When I've seen things that to me are perfect, and I still see negative comments about it. So you're always going to have naysayers. The Claude Giroux thing, and with Jake, they're kind of connected now at the hip, sort of, in terms of their time here in Philadelphia. And Chuck Aturi's kind of melded into that too, even though he's a younger player. They've been the core, right? They've been the core of this team now for almost a decade, and in Giroux's case, over a decade. He's missing, as captain, he's missing a long playoff run. He had a long playoff run as a young player, obviously, in 2010. And he had some great moments in the playoffs, too. Let's not forget that. But some people say he's not a clutch player because he hasn't been able to get this team on a run as a captain. Well, just go back and watch some of the 2010 playoffs, even the year before that. And moving forward, he's had some moments, obviously the check against Crosby to start the one game and then scoring. I mean, he's not – it's not like this is a guy who freezes up in clutch. I do read that. I hear that. It's just not the case. He's a great player. He's going to go down as one of the great Flyers. He's obviously climbing into the top 2-3 now in some of the categories, big categories, even number 1 now in power play assists. I never thought there'd be a stat like that anybody would catch Bobby Clark, right? So he's going to get that respect in terms of his numbers. But in sports, no matter what sport anymore, if you don't have a run, and quite frankly, almost have to have that championship to end one of those runs, but at least a run in the playoffs where you are the man. Like Keith Primo was known in really many circles for several years as a guy who, I don't know if he can get it done in the playoffs. Well, if you take a look at the 2004 playoffs, he dominated those playoffs. And that was never said about him ever again. Ed Belfour was once known as a goalie who just couldn't get it done in the playoffs. Won a cup, all of a sudden he was a money goalie. We overdo that. I think we're all guilty of it. But since Claude has not taken this team on a run, and Jake really hasn't been part of the team that's gone on a long run in the playoffs, I think until that happens, the fans are always going to be skeptical. I think it's not really justified because I think both guys can certainly rise to the occasion when it comes to the clutch time. But that's probably what holds them back and keeps Giroux from being perhaps thought of in the same terms as some of the legends the Flyers have had. But his numbers alone are going to get him into legendary status if he keeps piling them up, because he's climbing into the top 2 or 3 of all-time scoring for the Flyers. Right. And really, now with this, if they do lose these final 12 games of this season, that will slow him down a little. But he was really on pace to, by the end of next year, be second all-time in points, or at least close. So you get there, and a franchise has been around as long as the Flyers, you're doing a lot right. You're going to be considered a legend. But I wouldn't say I do think maybe a tad underrated locally, but I wouldn't say that he's like hated. I just think you're always going to have naysayers. Always. Right. I've seen them out there, and I see plenty of them about my own work. So you get it all the time, and that's just social media. Yeah. You have to take it for what it's worth. I still think most Flyers fans think a lot of Claude Giroux and Jake Voracek. Right.
And consistency is king, and I actually love that you challenged the Connor McDavid generational comment. That's such a rare thing to hear, but it's something that actually we talk about quite a bit, how consistency is kind of king, and it's amazing what McDavid is doing. It's amazing what every young player is doing, even Draisaitl, right? But, even somebody like Kucherov, right? He went from being all of a sudden the best player in the league to being like, oh, he's a really good player, right? And it's because his team is on a roll, right? He's a product of a consistent performing environment, right? Yes, he is an elite talent, but it requires a team around him to keep those numbers up. And it also requires doing it every year, right? And being consistent. And then you can be generational, right? It's at the end after you did it.
I think we're also very reactive, right? If Tom Brady struggles with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, I guarantee you there's going to be a strain of thought out there that he was made by Bill Belichick. It was all Belichick. Of course, Belichick can't win without Brady. The same might be said about him. But and both are great. I mean, clearly they're, in my opinion, Tom Brady's the best quarterback there's ever been, and I was a huge Joe Montana guy for a long time on that. And Belichick might be the best coach of all time. I don't know, but bottom line is, together they were unbelievable. Separate, it's tough to judge Tom at age, what is he going to be, 43, 42 for this coming season, and say, wow, if he doesn't get it done with the Buccaneers, he couldn't have done it without Belichick. But we tend to, it's all about that. It's all about saying what's the term? It's leaving me right now. When you
devil's advocate,
clickbait. There you go.
Clickbait. Yeah.
It's all about saying something or writing a headline that's going to get somebody to click on it, whether it's accurate or not. And to be honest with you, when it comes to Connor McDavid, he is, I think, the most dangerous player in the NHL right now. I mean, when he has the puck and you're the opponent, you're the coach, you're the fan, you're kind of holding your breath, but he's still got to show more to me to be considered a Sidney Crosby. Sidney Crosby at McDavid's age had already done so much that Connor hasn't done. In Connor's defense, he hasn't. The Olympic thing hasn't been part of the lexicon for him yet. But still, in terms of clutch performances, things like that, Sid is way ahead of Connor McDavid, who's 22 or 23 now. I think he might have just turned 23 here. Yeah. So it's like we've been gone for a month and a half. I don't know. But, so you just think about where Sid was at that point. And Sid has done a lot since, and I know it's almost sacrilegious in Philadelphia to talk Sidney Crosby up. I take heat about it all the time. But let me tell you, he's one of the top players in the history of the game, and I've covered him doing games for a national network, and he's unbelievable to deal with. So I'm not going to kill him. I do think when he first came to the league, and he will tell you this now, he was a whining, crying kind of player that irked us. We all talked about it. He's grown past that to some degree. He says it now that if he had to do over again, that's the one thing he might change, that he just complained about too many calls and he was too that way. But his career, you just can't argue with his career. But there'll be people out there, many of them here in Philly, who will shoot him down. So we are now in a society, guys, I think, where we have to be very careful, where you don't take everything you read, everything you see, everything you hear, and make that what everybody thinks. Everybody now has a vehicle to get their opinion out there. It's called Twitter. It's called all these other social media. So you have a way now to get your opinion out there. So if everybody in the world is getting their opinion out there, you're going to have one opinion that's here and another opinion that's way over here and everything in between. And it's up to you to figure out what's more the norm, what most people, or at least a majority of people, are thinking and believing. And I think the majority of Flyer fans think Claude Giroux is a really good player. I think the majority of people think Connor McDavid's a generational player because they've been told that, because he was kind of the anointed one by Canadian media. Yeah, he was the anointed one. I mean, let's face it. He has been, I hear he's the best player in the world at least once a day in my watching NHL coverage, right? And I'm like, I don't think so. I mean, he's the best offensive player maybe in the world. He is as I said earlier, the most dangerous player, but he's won one playoff series. He's at times been a bit of a liability in his own zone. He flies the zone a lot. Now, some of his coaches want him to do that. I don't think Dave Tippett's doing. I think Dave Tippett's been very good for him, but and he has a potential to be a Mount Rushmore player, but he's not there yet. He hasn't done enough yet to be there for me.
Agreed.
And that leads me into my next question. This season just had a magical feel to it, like the players, the fans. It was like the 2010 Cup run, where they faced the Blackhawks and ultimately lost in 6. But this season people haven't felt the way they do about this young Flyers team like they did probably since around the 2010, where they made that tremendous run. You look at teams like Pittsburgh, like Detroit, who used to, pound us, pound them, and used to like manhandle, whether it be in the playoffs, whether it be in the Cup and stuff. Now is the Flyers' time to start pounding those teams when it matters, so now they could give them a breath of, what Flyers fans and what, media personnel were thinking. Oh man, can we beat them? Do you think that this year was like the turning point in the Flyers franchise in terms of Cup contenders? Not just contenders, Cup contenders.
You'd like to hope so. I mean, it's so hard now to keep teams together. The one thing they have are a lot of young players. They also have the group of veteran players, and Chuck Fletcher and the organization have to figure out a way to transition salary-wise with the cap to keep it all together, at least in terms of the young core. The veterans are eventually going to move on, but there is a young base here. Ron Hextall deserves a lot of the credit. He drafted most of the players. It is a deep base, a deep defensive base, deep goaltending base, and they have started to develop quite a forward base as well. If they sprinkle in some really good free agent signings, this team could very well be a contending team for a long time. I got that feeling. When you talk about comparing to 2010, I thought 2010 was so much fun and amazing. But I watched the other day, it was probably about a month ago now, they put the game, I guess it was the game against Boston, as one of the classic games on, the game 7. And I was looking at the players in that roster. I mean, I believe the third defense pair was Ryan Parent and Lucas Krejci. Yep. I mean, this team way more talented than the 2010 team.
Yes.
But that 2010 team got on an unbelievable run. They got great performances from some guys like Philly Lano and something, and they went on. This team, I think this year's team, if all the players played where you expect them to play, where the stats say they should play, their expected performance, if you will, I think they would be a definite contender. If some guys go a little bit above, they'd be a cup contender. And some of these guys going a little bit above, it's just part of their natural progression because they're young players getting better. They needed Nolan Patrick. They needed Oscar Lindblom to, in my mind, be an absolute cup contender. That probably wasn't going to happen this year. Whether it happens now, everything is out there. Oscar's about to wrap up and hey, this is the best news yet, about to wrap up his cancer treatments and looks like he's doing really well. I don't know if he's ready to play or anything, but maybe down the road, because I know there was some talk he wouldn't even be able to play ever again. So if he can even play next year or the year after, I'll be happy because I love Oscar Lindblom. He's one of my favorite guys to be around, and what happened to him was just so tough. So and Nolan Patrick is the wild card, right? We don't know about him, but if you add those two to the mix that we saw playing so well, that's a loaded team up front with a defense core that's getting to the point of being loaded with Carter Hart. Looks like the real deal. That is a team that can contend not only just a playoff contender, but be a cup contender, and not only this year, but for a long time. Now, that's if they can keep it all together, and that's where Chuck Fletcher and his staff have to come in because they're going to figure out a way to keep everybody here.
And I think that he's done a really good job so far.
Yeah, he's done a great job. He's an experienced general manager. He knows how to deal, and he's done before. He's dealt with people think, well, Minnesota, he didn't have as much money to deal with, but they went for it under Chuck Fletcher. So he's dealt, even though it wasn't the same kind of market, they were kind of playing as a big market team for a while. So Chuck Fletcher's done a great job, and you think about his main acquisitions when you're talking about. Obviously, the one that got the most publicity was Kevin Hayes, but then you talk about the two defensive additions in Niskanen and Braun before the season started. I mean, all three have been huge additions. Braun started slowly, but really became a solid defenseman. Hayes has become a huge force on the ice, but also a huge part of this team with his off-the-ice persona. And Matt Niskanen we vote on the Bobby Clark Award for most valuable player, would probably get some votes, and he's just been so good. And then his addition, when he gets a couple guys at the deadline that I think are good support players that are going to help, and Grant and Thompson. I think Chuck's done a great job, and he knows what he's doing. He's been around it his entire life.
It definitely shows. Jim, honestly, thank you so much for joining us. Really, really appreciate it. And we don't want to take up too much more of your time, but just coming on this podcast.
Lots of time, but it's great. I've been doing a lot of podcasts, and it's fun because hey, we get to talk hockey because there's not games to talk about. So we're doing sim games on NBC Philly, and we have one that airs on Thursday, which is when we're talking right now, and then our last one is Monday, which is the anniversary of that. Where is it? It's over there. The longest game in the modern history of the NHL. When the Flyers, that's May 4th, which is the anniversary of that. That's a Dallas and the Flyers sim game is airing next Monday. So I think that's going to be the last one. I think at that point we're into May, and so I think we're done with the sim games. And hearing rumblings of those possible workouts starting sometime in May. So, guys, we might still have a season to call. I don't know. It's the great unknown, but there's at least rumblings that they're going to start working toward that in May.
Yeah. Well, we appreciate your time, Jim, and it's an honor for you to come on to our podcast.
You called me legendary earlier, which I seriously doubt. In fact, legendary to me means old. That's what it means. But anyhow, I hopefully have enough years left to watch a Cup here, because that is really what I came here when Eric Lindros was just starting, and I thought could have probably be calling a Cup here pretty quickly. It didn't happen, and now here we are 27 years later, and it would be nice to see this great fan base get to celebrate a championship. Wouldn't be able to call it because networks kick us out, but at least to experience it and watch it would be fun.
So stay safe, you and your family. God bless you.
Same to you guys. Good luck. It'll be a papa for a second time.
Thank you so much. Yeah, absolutely. It's an honor. Thank you so much. I will see you hopefully in September. Yeah, you
might see me in, I don't know, July. Who knows? We just don't know.
Let's go then.
All right, guys. Take care. Be safe.
Thank
All right, you too. Bye-bye.
You too, Jim. So that was an awesome interview with Jim Jackson, who we cannot thank enough for coming on our podcast, which was so awesome. And honestly, kind of a surreal moment for us, I think, a little bit. Just to, obviously we've only had this podcast for a little bit. And now we finally got somebody that we both admire on here. Obviously, we've had great guests, but somebody we both kind of look up to a little bit. So that was excellent. Jimmy, what'd you think? What'd you think about that interview?
Well, when you have a legendary broadcaster / announcer, coming on and giving you his time of day for about 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, however long, we went. Because, listen, I was just so fascinated with what he was saying about Eric Lindros. It really does make me appreciate the Big E even more, which a lot of our fan base does, and they love him. And because our fans are diehards. They love Jim Jackson. But just to hear Jim Jackson talk about how powerful, how great of a player Eric Lindros was, it makes you appreciate him even more. And now he's the ambassador for the team. I mean, he just threw out some great stuff, and it makes you go back into time saying, oh my God, I want to go back and watch those games just like how he had on his VHS, his tapes and stuff.
We're gonna have to ask him what he's doing with that stuff. Like,
it's
I want to watch.
Oh, absolutely. And there's anybody the best that's done it, it's Jim Jackson, because he lived it. He lived it right there, with Eric Lindros. He really saw this young man coming in, at the ripe age, at such a young age, and then him come in and develop into a mature hockey player, into a man, evolve, and how it makes me appreciate the Big E even more, than I already did.
That the very voice of the Flyers, who's been here since, what did we say, 95, 96, right?
Yeah, around there. Yeah.
Literally, he thinks, and I honestly, I think there's a lot of merit to what Jim Jackson is saying here, that potentially could have been the best player of all time. And, we talked about this on a previous episode. The skill set in which he brings forth is such a rare combination that even now we struggle to find players who, in pieces, are what Eric Lindros is, right? What did we say earlier with him? We said Eric Draisaitl meets Tom Wilson, and it's like, but we don't have a league with a Tom Wilson and a Draisaitl. Yeah. We don't have anything like that. I mean, even Jamie Benn, who's a very physical winger, an elite player. I mean, he still doesn't bring the same physicality and nastiness that Eric Lindros brought. It's really just like Tom Wilson.
I still think in terms of Flyers, in the Flyers organization anyway, the only player that came close after the Big E left was Keith Primo. Right. And that was because he was so dominant. He could take the puck, he could push the pace of play. He wasn't the fastest player, but he was fast enough to get the job, to bop and
big strides.
Had that physicality. He wouldn't be afraid, to stick up for his teammates. He wore the C for a reason. And to me, overall completeness of a player, Keith Primo was probably the closest. Now, of course, injuries, got to, Keith Primo as well in terms of, concussions, and that may have limited, him to come close in terms of numbers and different things and, playing. But Keith Primo would probably be the best comparable that I have personally seen, in my opinion anyway, that was even close to Eric Lindros donning a Flyer sweater anyway.
Yeah, I mean, the heart and soul type of leader, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we have more finesse players, and we've seen more finesse. And I say we because I group you in that. This has become more of a finesse league in terms of like reducing the amount of physicality, even though there is physicalness. But that's an area that is like they're not getting away from, but that's an area that's not a focal point anymore. You got more finesse players, you got more skilled players, today. And I don't take anything away from, past players because they were phenomenal. You look at him, look how skilled, Eric Lindros was. Look how powerful he was. Imagine Eric Lindros in today's game. I would think that right now he would be the best player in the NHL, and there's no one that even can debate with me on that.
I mean, it would really just be him or Crosby, and
I think, yeah, you got to give it to Crosby. Crosby is a complete player. He's a phenomenal player.
But he doesn't have the same physical gifts that Eric Lindros does, right? He's 5'11", 5'11", just under 200 pounds, I believe, somewhere around there.
You can be tall. You can be tall and have some weight, but it doesn't mean that you throw your physical. That doesn't mean you're physical. So like, and Sidney Crosby tries to be at times, but the Pittsburgh Penguins may limit him. We don't know behind the scenes and what they're telling him. Hey, don't lay some hits. We want you. You're too valuable. So they may be, putting a bug in his ear, stating that they don't want him to be as physical, because they've seen an Eric Lindros, they've seen Keith Primo's, they've seen,
longevity.
Eric Lindros's brother, Brett Lindros suffer, for a number of years and stuff. And yeah, exactly. Longevity. They're looking at it like you're too valuable. We lose you. Lord knows where we'd be, but we all know that the Pittsburgh Penguins somehow find a way to get it done, even if there's a minus a Crosby, minus a Malkin. I mean, that is a crazy organization over there in a good way for them. I mean, but now is the Flyers' time, and that's what I wanted to hit at with JJ, and I was glad that we touched on that. Now is the Flyers' time. Now it's our time to beat up those Detroit Red Wings teams, that were so good for years and who annihilated us, embarrassed us in the 1997, Stanley Cup final, 4-0. They swept us. Now is our time to throw that octopus on the ice, and now is our time to defeat the Pittsburgh Penguins and, just take Crosby's game and shove it down his throat. Now is the Flyers' time to contend for years. Now is our time to take back this league, and that's what the Flyers are going to do. I really believe that they are cup tenders. This isn't a short-term thing. In my eyes, the season reconvenes. The Flyers have to be in cup contention. They should be. I mean, they were a dynamite going into this, situation. In my opinion.
And I think regardless what happens this year, right? The test will be next year, right? Can they bring that same effort again? Same coach, right? Now those excuses have been taken away, right? Like we already have the talent. The young players are already adjusted. We have the coach. We have the two coaches around them. Jim was talking about that earlier, right? Keeping the team together. We can actually keep them together, right? This was Hextall's efforts over the years. We can actually keep our core, which is really a large collection of players. We can keep them all together, right? As we move forward, and we can compete. And next year will be a really, really good sign that if this is for real. And I think we both believe that this is, and I expect them to pick up where they last left off, right? Like they should begin the season next year, regardless of what happens this year, as one of the best teams in the division. I expect it right off the bat next year, and I think you do too. Like they don't have to be the best team. Like I'm not saying that if they start off slow that there's no chances or any of that, but the expectations are now you're on a roll. Like this is a good team. It's a good team that everybody should be looking for them to compete for a cup. Maybe next year, right?
I mean, you look at it, there's going to be some changeover in our division. Braden Holtby may not even be back in Washington, so that may free them up cap because they may or may not. I know they don't have the cap space right now, but I don't know their whole cap situation looking into the offseason and what it's like. But they may not be in a position to where they would like to re-sign Braden Holtby because Braden Holtby is still young, so he's looking for a long-term contract. And right now they got Samsonov knocking at the door there. Washington may be hesitant to give Braden Holtby, a long-term contract. So you're going to see a change over there. And then you're looking at Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh's always against the cap. And these players that they added at the trade deadline, now will they stay? Will they go? Who are they going to keep? They're always trying to finagle, some things and trying to not to break up the team too much, because, that's just the type of organization they are. But each year they have to let go of certain players, certain pieces that they had, like, Benino's, just rocking and rolling,
Right, yeah. Guys who found success, but they couldn't hold on to them.
Right, that's what I mean. They got some, like, players that, go to other teams and sort of, struggle. And I'm not saying Benino's one of them, but I am just using him as an example.
Right.
Connor Siri has great years, with Pittsburgh, and then goes to, to the Buffalo Sabres, and not so much, so like, and now he's back in the fold. Now, can he get back to the level that he was, during, playoff runs when F and when the season reconvenes, and then you got, of course, the durability of Evgeny Malkin and Sidney Crosby. These players aren't spring chickens anymore, so like if one of them go down, they have to rely heavily on their farm system, in such a way that they're irreplaceable players, obviously, but they have to replace them some way, shape, or form, and they may not have the cap space to do it. Now you have question marks at their goaltending position. Are they okay with rolling with a Matt Murray and a Tristan Jarry, who played very well this year, over exceeded my expectations, because I thought Jarry was just an AHL goalie,
yeah,
in my opinion, but I'm surprised at how well he was. But
that's what the Penguins do, right? I mean, they always perform. I don't think we should expect them to take a big step back, but I do agree with you, right? I mean, they don't have the depth in the organization they had in the back in the day. We know Washington isn't the same team that was under Barry Trotz, right? We know actually that's the Islanders now, right? Yeah. Who, independent of talent, will continue to compete, so they'll be consistent. But they're not a big market team. They can't go out and do what the Capitals did and go out and spend the cap every year and consistently do that. Not quite yet. Maybe they will get there. They probably will. But they're on their way up, right? But they're not there yet. This is a changing of the guard in a lot of ways, right? And it's kind of obvious. And the Flyers are, if you really analyze and you understand the organization, there is no steps backwards anymore for the Flyers. Potentially it could happen, but it would have to be mistakes. Like, naturally the team already will progress, and that's without adding any additional players in the offseason, which we definitely will, right? So if Chuck Fletcher continues to do what he's doing, not only is it going to be a changing of the guard, he can ensure that it will be, right? By just adding one serious piece to this team. I know a lot of people wanted it last year, but this might actually be the year to add another guy of, like, maybe Kevin Hayes' caliber, maybe playing on defense, and that will elevate us another step above, right?
And they could do that. Looking at the UFAs, I mean, if they do not re-sign Justin Braun, and I say if because
we don't know, right?
Right, that's what I mean. So if they as of right now, if they don't re-sign Justin Braun, that's $3.8 million, in savings. I'm positive that he could get 4 to 4.5, get a little uptick there. But still, let's just say hypothetically they don't, and say they don't re-sign Derek Grant and they don't re-sign Tyler Pitlick. That's $1.7 million added on, so that's $5.5 million there. And not to mention Brian Elliott, who, is on a 1 year, $2.5 million deal too. So you're looking at possibly close to, $8 million there just on salary right there off those free agents. Now, I personally believe that Brian Elliott resigns. I don't know what he's going to resign for. I would presume it's probably for around the same rate that he's making now, in my opinion. So the Flyers there would still have $5.5 million worth of cap.
I mean, regardless, they'd have to sign
off the books. But then they have Chris Stewart falling off the books. All these other players.
Yeah. Well, Chris Stewart is more of a contract spot, right? I think for the most part, I'm not really concerned about the Flyers' cap problems. I know a lot of people are. I'm a little confused why people say we're in cap trouble. We are in no cap trouble at all. Just because we're up at the cap doesn't mean we're in cap trouble.
Right.
I mean, we have all the flexibility in the world. We have all the young talent in the world. We have all of our key veterans locked up. In fact, quite frankly, we have zero outside of Andrew McDonald, who's going to come off the books eventually, and Gudis. That is really the only negative salary we're carrying. Outside of that, I think we're kind of golden. I mean, I wouldn't even let Derek Grant go personally. And I don't think Justin Braun is going to demand the same price everybody else is saying. I personally, I don't think he's getting that on the open market. I understand why the temptation would be there to give it to him, but he's a 32-year-old player getting older. If he wants term, there's no way he's going to get $4 million plus. I just can't see it, because that would assume that he'd have to be a top 4 defender on the team, right? And I don't know if Justin Braun is a top 4 guy. Maybe on a bad team he is. On a bad team he definitely is. I
just look at teams like the Toronto Maple Leafs. Even we could filter in even the Colorado Avalanche in there in terms of might needing some defensive help. Like the Toronto Maple Leafs are in a pickle here with a logjam themselves. In terms of forwards. And let's not be surprised. Nicholas Robertson.
They can't afford
knocking on the door here too for the Leafs as well. So
that's what I'm saying.
They can't. But they can't afford it. But what I'm saying, they could part ways with a Kasperi Kapanen to withstand that type of contract.
They would never do that though, right? They would never get rid of a Kasperi Kapanen to keep a Justin Braun, right?
Nicholas Robertson, who's about. I'm telling you.
Yeah, but the value of Braun is not enough to get rid of a key young player. That's what I'm saying. I'm not saying that they wouldn't want Braun. They definitely would want him. I just don't think he's getting $4.5 million on the market. I really don't think he is going to get more than 3. That's how I see it. I don't see him getting a raise, even though he probably deserves one. I don't see it.
If he signed, I could see him signing for, and I respect your opinion. I don't want anybody.
Well, it's just we just disagree.
Yeah, and it's fine, that we disagree, because everybody doesn't agree. But I'm not arguing with you by any means, and I want to make that clear to our viewers and stuff. Everybody's entitled to their own opinions. Where I was getting at is that the Leafs, I'm not saying that they would like to part with one of their forwards, but they can with their system, with their farm system set up in such a way that's like the Flyers, that they could forego, letting a Kasperi Kapanen go, whether it's via trade or some of that.
Yeah, I just can't see Justin Braun being part of that conversation. Like I do understand what you're saying. Like if they wanted to go out and get a D-man, maybe Kapanen's that guy who gets moves, right? Like that's why everybody said goes for Kapanen, right? Like that does make sense to me, right? And with a guy like what you're talking about with Robertson coming in, it makes him more expendable, right? Or at least allows you to replace Kapanen or somebody with for Kapanen's position, right? But overall, like Braun is going to be the type of guy. He's a complete free agent type of guy. Wherever he goes, it's going to be because they can fit his contract in there already. He's not the type of guy who teams are going to move players out to make room for. Like, I think actually that's why we paid a second and a third for him, because he just kind of fit exactly what we needed. He's a 1-year contract. He's a great locker room guy. He's a right-handed dude. We knew that he could play from the 4 position to the 6 position. He's a kind of exactly what we needed. Where Andrew McDonald, and we brought this up the other day, right? Maybe that was the pick they didn't need to make. Andrew McDonald is not as flexible. He was really just going to be the number 6 on your team. He's not going to be as physical, right? He is the leader in the locker room, but not the same way that Justin Braun is, right? So it's like I feel like that was always Braun's value, and I don't know if a lot of teams are going to be able to pay him the cash that we're talking about. I just don't know if they're going to be in that position. Maybe I'm wrong though. I mean, I could be wrong. If it's a 1-year deal, I mean.
There's a lot of moving parts. It's going to be an interesting offseason, to say the least, not only for the Philadelphia Flyers, but for some other teams that are against the cap. And I will say, it's not some. It's the majority of the NHL. Because if they keep the cap, as is at $81.5 million, teams like that were going gung ho at the trade deadline, may not be able to re-sign. You know what I mean? Though they may not be able to sign these players. And they gave up first round. I mean, they gave up a ton.
You might be right. Yeah.
A ton of players. And now they're going to be, excuse my language, ass out. let's be honest there. That's just the situation that we're in because nobody predicted this pandemic. And that's what makes me appreciate Chuck Fletcher even more is because he prepared for the future. He prepared for next year. I'm going to go out. I'm going to get these two glue pieces in terms of Derek Grant because we have some need, down the middle, size, plays the PK, could chip in on the power play at times, if the Flyers needed him. Not saying he could be an everyday power play man, but he has done it in his career and has succeeded, in the having some power play time. Nate Thompson, who plays the PK well, but has physicality to his game. Maybe not as physical as he once was, but still can stick up for, his teammates if need be, So
but he probably won't be here next year. Derek Grant, yes, but Nate Thompson.
I'm saying that this was a young Flyers team. He didn't.
Oh, right.
Fletcher didn't want Joel Farabee throwing down the mitts because he's too valuable to take off the ice, right?
He definitely.
You want a player like Nate Thompson to fill that role. Okay, you want to mess with our young guns? This is what's going to happen. Nate's just going to come down there and lay down the law. I don't want TK, although he can, to fight, and he's a feisty player, but I don't want him off the ice for 5 minutes. That's the advantage for the other team. I don't want these intelligent hockey players, really good hockey players, skilled-wise, off the ice for any amount of time, more so than what they have to be. And it's great that Joel Farabee has that in him, that drive. Hey, you want to mess around, this is going to happen. But I don't want it because, I'd rather have Nate Thompson fill that.
Right.
That's...
Well, I don't think anybody ever thought that Farabee was filling that kind of role, though, right?
But he did at times.
But you can't stop a player from dropping the gloves either, right?
You can't. But I mean, that's where that's why the GM could throw these players out there like a Nate.
So it doesn't happen. You're saying to stop it from ever even getting to that point. Yeah, I mean, I think that is the idea, right? I think that same Justin Braun, right? It's the same type of idea. Matt Niskanen. These are guys who. You're not going to come and get under their skin anywhere near the degree that you can get under the skin of a kid, right? Like that kid is most likely going to either care about what you say a lot more than an older player. Older players are vastly more used to the NHL level of the smack talk, anything beyond that, right? So, I think you bring up a good point there. But, Jamie, I think the one thing we took overall from the Jim Jackson conversation is this team is definitely ready to compete. Jim sees it. Yeah. I see it. You see it.
The fans
both see it. The fans see it. Everybody's excited. I think even for once the NHL sees it. And it's really good to see. So let's sign off. This was a great episode for us, right? This is maybe our best. I mean, it was pretty awesome.
Oh, no, it was great.
Just thank him a million times over for coming on and giving us time and talking to us even outside of the podcast and just being an super easy, humble, and really awesome guy and with great insight. And I think the interview went even better than we were hoping. And, more to come for the future, right, Jamie? I mean...
Oh, absolutely. We love you all very much, and I can't thank you enough because if it wasn't for your support, we wouldn't have gotten JJ on this podcast today. Let me just make that clear. You have given us the forum. You're giving us the tools to excel. Now it's our time to give you the tools back. And so it's a hand-in-hand thing. And, this was a phenomenal podcast, and I just want to say thank you to everybody. Thank you, Reef. You did a great job. JJ, man, what a great guy. Man, I love that guy to death, man. He's just easy to talk to. You know what I'm talking about when you're at practices and stuff, and you just sit there, in the press area, and you're just talking to JJ. You go on for hours. And but
so easy to talk to. So easy to talk to.
It was great. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. We'll be back with more. We'll have more episodes, more content, more guests, more everything. We are not going to stop. Remember that. Even if the season gets canceled tomorrow, it is irrelevant. We are not going to stop because we know the Flyers will be back. So we are not going away. Regardless of what happens in this world, Jamie and I will be consistent and we will keep coming with content. And for more, we love you guys. Come back next week. Please tell your friends, tell your family, like, subscribe, do whatever you need to do. But thank you so much. We love you. Talk to you next week.